An Honorable Profession is brought to you by OpenCounter.com. OpenCounter builds tools for local governments to deliver permits and licenses online. Their portals make complex permitting simple, which lowers transaction costs, increases transparency, and empowers economic development. Check out OpenCounter.com to see what they can do for your community. Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm your host, Ryan Coonerty. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports some of the most thoughtful and innovative voices in American politics. I've been a member of New Deal for years, both when I was mayor of Santa Cruz and now on the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors. Check out some of our past episodes with guests like Washington State Lieutenant Governor Cyrus Habib, Emily Kane of Emily's List, Stephen Reed, the first African-American mayor of Montgomery, Alabama, and dozens of amazing leaders at the state and local level. You can find us at newdealleaders.org or wherever podcasts are found. And if you like what you hear, please tell your friends. We're trying to bring sanity to politics in an insane era. We need all the help we can get. Today, on An Honorable Profession, I'm speaking with Georgia State Senator Jen Jordan. Jen made national headlines with a deeply personal speech on the floor of the state Senate about her experiences with pregnancy and miscarriage and the impacts of anti-choice legislation on women. Since then, she's fought for more transparency in government, better cybersecurity, and more opportunity for the residents of her state. Now, as her state's governor ignores the pleas from health experts to not lift the restrictions needed to fight the coronavirus, she's again fighting for the lives of her residents. We talked about all this, her journey from an impoverished childhood in rural Georgia to becoming one of the state's leading lawyers with a bright political future. She's one to watch. Jen Jordan, Georgia State Senator, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
So let's just start with the current news. Your state has been in the news a lot lately because your governor's decided to go in a different direction than health advisors and even the president want him to go. How are things going in Georgia, and what kind of role do you play in a moment like this?
Yeah, obviously things aren't going that great, and it's difficult because the governor is the executive of the state and is making a lot of the decisions when it comes to people's lives and their health. And so it's been kind of a difficult time because, all of us are home. And in the state Senate, there were a few members of the state Senate that were positive for COVID-19. So the entire Georgia General Assembly ended up having to quarantine for 14 days. Right after we approved the governor's emergency powers. So we've kind of, we've been home like everybody else. But I'll tell you the biggest thing that I see kind of as my role, especially for my constituents, is just really trying to get information out there and solid information too. People are scared. They want to know what's going on, and they want to know what the data is. And so it's been really important to me, to basically kind of be a check on the governor to some extent. He's represented certain data, in a way that can be misleading. And, I think for me, it's about kind of just shining a light on that, and making people aware that he might not be making the best decisions in terms of, the public health directives, but that people individually can make decisions to still stay home and protect themselves and others.
And can you talk a little bit of that experience about what it's like to sort of be in quarantine? You have 2 kids. You're trying to balance all this in a very heated, difficult environment. Sort of what's been your day like? Is it just endless Zoom calls and trying to get that data out there, and how receptive have people been to it?
It's a little weird. I mean, it's, you've got your kids, so you've got to get them going and on their virtual schools, and then all the Zoom calls with whether it's school systems or county commissioners or mayors, really just trying to stay as connected as possible. And really it is about, everybody really wants the same thing, which is to make sure that we have the best data possible and that we're making the best decisions, based on the data. And so all of the calls I've had, whether it's with hospitals or hospital systems, doctors and the like, that's, everybody's kind of been singing from the same, songbook with respect to that. But in terms of the day itself, it's tough. I've got dogs and, kids in the background and, and you kind of go in and out because you're not on a real set schedule. It's like, what day is it and where are we? And, there is no normalcy right now. And it's just one of those things we're having to wait too. We're so dependent on the governor right now and the information that his office is willing to give or to release, and then just trying to take the time to really kind of delve into it and see kind of where the issues are. For a long time, they weren't releasing anything on long-term nursing facilities here, the nursing homes, and we're being really aggressive about that. Now we know that probably over half the deaths in the state of Georgia are of, residents from nursing homes. And so it's that kind of thing where you have to kind of keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Even if you use social media, it's not the most fun just to spend your day rage tweeting, but every now and then it gets some results. So, it's weird times for sure, right?
It is. That it is. I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a puppy at home. And what I've told everyone, the main thing I've learned is that if you give a 5-year-old a captive audience, they can talk for about 18 hours straight. And so it's amazing. Just my son he just talks all day, every day, no matter what's going on in our house.
They're like attention black holes. They just want attention, and they want you to be paying attention to them all the time.
All day.
It's all day. It is exhausting. The younger the children are, the tireder parents tend to be, because it's a lot right now. So,
It absolutely is. And then in terms of your state, in some ways, is a microcosm for some of the divides we see in the country between party and urban and rural. I know you've done a lot to try to break down those divides, but this virus and specifically your governor's approach to it expose it or may drive even bigger wedges. What do you see in terms of how your state's going to respond politically in this election coming up to the decisions that are made around coronavirus and a whole host of other issues?
Look, I think people are paying attention in part because they're kind of, captured right now. That's why the president's press conferences were getting such high ratings. There was really such a kind of a hunger for people just to understand or know what was happening in the country and then even in the state. But you're right, Georgia and kind of what we're going through really kind of reveals a lot of the stuff we already knew in terms of the disparate ability for Black Georgians to access health care in the state, and especially Black Georgians that live in rural Georgia. We have not invested in health care infrastructure here. We haven't expanded Medicaid at all, and it's one of those things where you would think and you would hope that someone seeing this or looking at this experience would then guide public policy in a way to make sure this couldn't happen in the future. But we're not seeing that. The governor could expand Medicaid today. He has the ability to do that. And he has chosen not to do that and instead has decided to reopen the state, even though we know that we don't meet any of the criteria laid out by the White House or by any of the public health officials. So, there's going to be a lot written and a lot said about this crisis, but particularly Georgia and this crisis and how it really just revealed a lot of the fault lines that we already knew were there. But politically, now this is interesting. Today we crossed the line for 1 million absentee ballot applications.
Wow.
And to understand just how significant that is, I think in the 2016 election, primary election, maybe there were 25,000 absentee ballots cast. So I do think people are paying attention, and I think they're going to hold people accountable, one way or the other.
Can you talk, certainly we all saw really concerning voter suppression in Georgia in the last election. Are we going to have to, are we looking at similar dynamics in this election? And then sort of what are you and your colleagues doing to try to protect people's right to vote?
So I think one of the biggest things is that we're pushing for folks to vote by mail. I mean, I am, in part because of public health concerns. But also, once somebody gets their absentee ballot in, it's in. And, nothing's going to stop you, right? Weather or work or kids or sickness or whatever. Once you get that ballot in, you've got a ballot cast there. So we've been pushing that. But, they're using the crisis, they meaning, a lot of Republicans are using the crisis as a way to try to push dates back, confuse people. And, we've just got to be very clear in terms of the messaging we send out to our constituents, no matter what party they belong to, that, this is how you vote. This is the easiest way to vote. And if you have any questions, we have very clear lines of communication with respect to that. So, the best thing probably there, Ryan, is that we have so many pending federal lawsuits that came out of all of the incompetence, et cetera, from 2018 that, it's interesting when you have a federal judge looking over someone's shoulder, they tend to act a little bit better. So, the fact of the litigation in and of itself, I think is really going to help make sure that a lot of the bad stuff that's happened before, doesn't happen again. At least not this cycle.
Okay. Well, good. And then hopefully the state swings and really comprehensive election reform and protections. You can implement them and protect all the voters in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
I mean, just to try to make it easier to vote for everybody. And then, maybe we can have an actual contest of ideas and policy. That'd be amazing.
Shocking that's a controversial idea in 2020.
Controversial. Very controversial. So
you were just eloquently talking about some of the health disparities in Georgia. And in reading about you, one of the things that really struck me was you argue a lot on data and law, and we'll talk about your experience there, but you also bring to bear your personal experience being raised by a single mom in rural Georgia. And can you talk a little bit about your path and how it informs, how you approach your job?
Yeah, I think it in some ways it makes you more empathetic, but it also gives you a basis of knowledge, right? Like, so for example, the governor invoked Tammy the hairdresser as one reason why he wanted to, reopen the hair salons, because Tammy was going to lose her car or something. So I don't know if Tammy exists or not, but my whole thing is, okay, well then why don't you make it where Tammy can access unemployment benefits because she's an independent contractor? Why aren't you making sure she has her stimulus money? Why aren't we as a state helping Tammy in other ways other than making her have to choose between, paying her bills and her health? Oh yeah, and Tammy probably doesn't have health insurance either. because she can't afford it. So if Tammy gets sick, then Tammy ends up, in the hospital system, can't afford, the care she's getting, and then that's going to result in, even more issues economically for her or health-wise. So it's kind of this thing where if you've never been there and you don't understand actually what's happening in a household or with people that are dealing with these kind of economic issues, it's easy probably just not to get it, right? Like you think, oh, well, Tammy can go and now work. And it's like, it's really not what we should be doing to people, especially low-wage workers who really are just struggling to get by. We really should be focused on policy that's going to support them through this time so that when we're ready in terms of the data, that they can open their businesses and they can do it in a way that they can ensure their customers that, they can be healthy, but then also make sure that they're protecting themselves too. And so, it's just a really awful situation to put these folks in, to have to make these decisions. But I know that because my mom didn't have health insurance. She couldn't afford it. And I know she was an independent contractor. And I know that if this happened to her, we would be in a horrible situation, and I would hate if she would have had to make the decision like that to kind of endanger her life, herself, and also her children, just because the governor of the state wasn't really listening to public health officials.
Yeah, I mean, elevating the voice of people who so often aren't heard in the system, and their real life experience is just it's just vital to add context. It's so much easier when it's just like these binary choices, work, don't work. But actually, it's human beings are very complicated, and I think you do an extraordinary job of telling that story. Can you? Some
people just don't know, right, Ryan? Like if you've never been an independent contractor, if you've never, a lot of folks just say, well, go get unemployment or go do this or go do that, not understanding that some of these programs aren't accessible to certain workers, right? And it's just kind of one of these things where even, elected officials don't get that. And so we need to be more cognizant about kind of the policy decisions we're making and the impact that they really do have on ordinary Georgians.
When did it occur to you that there was a role of politics and government in people's lives that you decided that was a path for you? You grew up daughter of a hairdresser. You worked your way through college with 3 different jobs. What made politics and policy jump out at you as a place where you wanted to spend your time and talent?
So the biggest thing for me is that when I look back kind of at my life, nobody does anything by themselves. And at every kind of juncture of my life, no matter how hard it was, I was getting some kind of assistance due to a policy decision that had been made by elected officials, whether it's getting free lunch and breakfast, as a child, Section 8 housing, whether it was, for us in Georgia, we have something called the Hope Scholarship. And it was originally passed and said, if you get a B, if you can keep a B average, you can have your tuition covered. And I was part of that first class of kids who were able to get that. And so it kind of opened my eyes and the door to college, because before I hadn't really thought about it that much, and made it something that was accessible to me. And so like every step of the way, right, or federal student loans, and in terms of keeping the interest rates low, it's all this stuff that if you really kind of think about your life and kind of how we go about things, really public policy, and like I said, the decisions that our elected officials make can have significant impact on people's lives, for good and bad. And so that's why it was important to me, because it's one of those things where it's like, I've been given a lot and I've been incredibly lucky. But none of it would have been possible unless unless those Democrats weren't passing those laws when they did, and weren't pushing for certain, public policy, initiatives when they did. And so it's kind of a little bit of a way of pay it forward kind of thing. But, if we're not advocating for it, especially coming from a place of knowledge and also gratefulness, then I'm not sure, who will. So that's kind of what kind of pushed me in that area, because I just understood kind of the impact that it had on my life personally.
And it's amazing when you think about it, because, the few stories of people abusing unemployment or public housing vouchers or other things get such headlines, but like you're a perfect example of a amazing return on investment. So I think I agree with your gratitude, but also the state of Georgia got a lot back for a relatively small amount of preventative investment to give you the opportunity, and that's a story that doesn't get told enough, I don't think, when we're talking about these issues.
No, and especially rural Georgia and the public education system. I mean, it is really the lifeline for kids. I think things have changed a little bit because of the access. The internet's changed people's ability to kind of see outside of their own world a little bit. So that's been helpful. It kind of has broadened a lot of kids' horizons, I should say. But before that, if you never left where you were born or came from and didn't have family outside of a certain county in Georgia, didn't have money or means, I mean, that's all you knew. And so, when you don't have anyone modeling certain behavior, or you've never known anybody go to college, or you never knew a lawyer, or, anything like that, it's very hard, I think, for kids to kind of say, well, that's what I want to do, or that, that's the path I'm going to take. But for a lot of kids in these situations or in these school districts, the public education system really is kind of their lifeline, and their way out of poverty. I mean, and they can stay in rural Georgia. I'm not saying that you have to get out of rural Georgia not to be poor, to escape poverty, but definitely it is their way to actually make a better life for themselves, which is kind of part of it, right? What you were talking about, the amazing return. I mean, it's kind of the investment in public education. I mean, returns, 20-fold what we put into it. Because then, kids get good jobs, they pay taxes, they don't stress the judicial system or the prison system. And, whether you look at it from a moral place, that it's the right thing to do and it's what we should be doing, for people, or you look at it just from a clear economic data position, I mean, clearly the more we put into public education on the front end, and the earlier we can start doing that and investing in these kids, I mean, the returns, are just astronomical.
I couldn't agree more. So in terms of, you talked about seeing new opportunities. Take us back to 2016, 2017. You're a practicing lawyer with your family. You've got a lot of professional accolades, trying interesting cases. What made you decide to run for office? And tell me about that first decision to go out and start knocking on doors and putting your name on a ballot.
Yeah, so I've always been political in the sense I've been really interested in public policy, but I never necessarily wanted to run myself because I loved my job. I loved my law firm and life was good, right? But I had a case where an 18-year-old girl was sexually assaulted in a dental office. And, long story short, we get to the Georgia Supreme Court, and I'm arguing the case, and, the Supreme Court members come out, and they're all men. And the questions that they asked really reflected kind of a lack of understanding. in terms of sexual assault, what women go through, the resulting trauma, whatever it is. I mean, just a real lack of understanding, in part because there was a lack of diversity on the bench and a place of knowing, right? A place of knowledge, because none of them were women. They didn't even have women discussing the case with them. And I just knew from the questions that it wasn't going to go well. And then, we in fact lost the case at the Georgia Supreme Court. And I had to call my client and tell her that was it. And, she was devastated. And it was at that point in time that I was like, you know what? We have to have more women in office. We have to have more women in the room when these policy decisions are being made, or when laws are being drafted, or just when the conversations are happening. Partly because it offers a different voice, and an important voice. So that's when I was like, first opportunity, I'm gonna run for something. And Hunter Hill, the Republican state senator at the time, announced and said he was going to run for governor. And I was like, all right, well, better do it. I guess this is my sign. And people told me I was crazy because it was a Republican state Senate district and had been drawn to be, when the lines were drawn, I think in 2012, had been drawn to be, I think, a 59% performing Republican district. So, it was funny. It was like when I talked to people that were friendly to me and I would tell them that I was running, it was almost that voice that people have when they hear you have cancer or something. They're like, oh, well, that's nice. Good for you. And it was like, no, there's something more going on here. And so then we ended up flipping the seat, which ended up taking the supermajority away from the Republicans in the state Senate. And I kind of look at my race, and that was the end of 2017, as kind of the canary in the coal mine for what was happening in Georgia in terms of the transition, especially in the Atlanta suburbs, and kind of the larger role and the louder voice that women were starting to have when it came to kind of these local or state, elections. So, it's fascinating looking back at it because, no one thought we could do it, and then we did it. And really, we were just kind of the precursor. We were like the appetizer for Stacey Abrams and the rest of them. So, but you could see it happening even then.
Let's hope, let's hope you were the appetizer, and now there's a really big meal plus dessert, cherry on top coming in the future elections in your state. You talked about the importance of bringing that voice after that crazy ruling in the case you had, and you did it on the HB 481 vote where you got up on the floor of the state Senate and gave a really personal speech about your experiences with pregnancies and miscarriages and the impact that pregnancy has on women's lives. It got you a lot of national attention and a huge amount of appreciation. How did you decide that was the right time to share your experience? And were you nervous? Walk us through what that was like, making that decision to bring your personal experience to the floor of the state Senate.
Yeah, I really didn't decide to do it until we were about halfway through with the debate on the bill. I had two different versions of a speech I was going to give, one with the personal information and one without. Because I just didn't know. No one had read it except for my husband. And the only reason I let him read it was because I thought that, it's his life experience as well. And I felt like he needed to kind of know what I was going to say. And the only words of advice he gave to me was that I didn't owe anybody, that information. And for me not to feel like I had to do it. So, So I had two different versions, and I was sitting there, and it was just a really frustrating few hours because the debate was kind of the same back and forth. Republicans would say one thing, Democrats would say another. And it was just maddening because there didn't seem to be.
And just for the background of our listeners, so the bill was a heartbeat, quote unquote, heartbeat bill that is being used as a way to challenge Roe v. Wade and choice for not only Georgia but for the whole country, right?
Yeah, it's effectively an abortion ban. It says, when most people don't even know they're pregnant, you can't get an abortion, period. So, and there are a couple of exceptions, but even those are, a little extreme. So, we were one of the states to do it. Surprisingly to me, because normally, or at least the last governor was able to kind of sideline a lot of those social, really socially divisive kind of back and forth, debates. But this governor was pushing it. And so, when you have the governor of the state pushing certain legislation, it gets on the floor. And so, we were debating it, and it was all men, that got up to speak for it on the Republican side, except for the one woman Republican sponsor who was the only Republican woman in the chamber. And, it just was a real lack of understanding of what all of this meant for women. And then also healthcare providers. So it just felt like it was necessary. And, it was kind of like the light just went on for me, and I said, this is the right time to do this. And, maybe I can change one person's mind, or maybe one person will take a walk on the vote, or, something. Because it really felt like folks needed to understand what it really means to people on a very personal level, and not just kind of the normal rhetoric you hear on both sides. So, that's why I did it and made the decision kind of on the spot. And, by the time I got up there, I was pretty resolved. So, I wasn't really that nervous. But it was a surreal experience talking about things you don't want to talk about, in front of, the state Senate. It was a really bizarre kind of experience in that way.
And talk a little bit about the reaction you've gotten from both constituents, and then what was the Republican, your Republican peers' response to it?
Interestingly enough, they all voted for the bill, which in some ways was, it felt personal, mm-hmm. because there are Republicans that I know and like and respect, and I know that they're good, bright people. And you can even be someone who is not necessarily, pro-choice and still think that there are significant problems with the bill. So, there was a way to vote against it. Let me say that. Right. And not really have your pro-life bona fides impeached. But so that felt really personal afterwards. But, I had a lot of folks say to me, wow, I think that is really powerful. And I said, well, it didn't change any votes. And the response basically was, but I think it may in the future change some hearts. So, I think it was a gut check for people. It wasn't going to change anything at that moment because it had become such a team kind of thing, like, we're all going to vote for it, but I was hoping just to kind of reframe the issue for the future so that maybe in the future, if this came up, we could keep more bills like this kind of from coming to the floor and getting passed. So that was the Republican, senators. And then I was really surprised at kind of the outpouring of support from my constituents and also from women around the country. You know, it really is something that every woman has a story, one way or the other. And, you know, I think a lot of women always feel like no one's really speaking for them. And so, you know, I think in a lot of ways people or women felt like finally someone was kind of standing up and speaking for them in a way that really reflected their own experiences.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly powerful. Is it Atlanta magazine that did a profile of you after the speech, and it not only, I think, tells a compelling story of your experience, but also the reaction that you get out in public from people, specifically women, for being their voice. I encourage folks to go out and read it. So you talked about the future, and one of the things that has happened because of the strong stance you've taken on a number of issues in the state, and then also that speech, is your name has been brought up to run for the U.S. Senate and other positions. How are you thinking about your political future and where you can have a best impact, and what does that look like?
I'm not entirely sure right now. I'll tell you that I'm had a lot of, obviously during quarantine, you have a lot of time to think about things. And also kind of seeing the impact of what, you know, this virus is having on the state. You know, what are the opportunities in terms of public policy, policies that we could push, that maybe people would be more amenable to right now because of the crisis, and trying to identify those and maybe try to get them pushed through, you know, if not this session, the next session. And I think that the policy is what might guide my decision making kind of in the future. You know, what office, is it the state Senate? Staying in the state Senate, is that the best choice in terms of, you know, the things I want to see happen for the state? Or is there another office where I think that I could, you know, really do some good? So, you know, it's kind of an open question right now because, you know, I think we're in such a weird place because of COVID that, you know, I think we're just going to have to step back and look around and reassess once we kind of come out of this, or at least come out of it to a point where, you know, we're not just having to stay in our homes.
Right. Just get a little bit out of the crisis and try to get some perspective on where things go. Yeah.
Where do things go from now? Like, who did a good job and who didn't, right? Like,
yeah.
Because a lot of the time you don't necessarily want to run for something if somebody's doing a good job. I mean, if somebody's delivering for, you know, their constituents or for the people, then, you know, you can kind of step back a little bit. But, you know, if there's been once we kind of reassess or able to assess kind of what happened here, and, you know, if there was leadership or if there wasn't, I mean, I think that's when we're going to see if there might be some opportunities or not.
That makes sense. Well, for my 2 cents from way out here in California, I think it'd be wonderful to have your voice and the way that you can talk about your experience and others' experience, that's also rooted in policy at the statewide or national level. It'd be a benefit not only to the people of Georgia but to the whole country. So hope during all this quarantine you have some time to think a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us. Please stay safe. Hope your family stays safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you back at a New Deal conference, hopefully in person sometime soon, where we can all try to figure out what this path is for policy going forward to better help our communities in the future.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, this has almost been like a stress test, right? And I think it's just revealing a lot of the areas that, that we really need to pay attention to in the future. So, if we look at it from a glass half full perspective, maybe this really is going to open up some opportunities to do some good.
I agree. I mean, I think, we're going to have more crises, public health, environment, economic, in our future. And this has shown a lot of weaknesses in the system that need investment now. So the costs will be lower and the next time something like this comes around.
Absolutely. Well, stay safe.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders. And keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces this podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.